We have We Three Kings. I have a long history with that song, and it never quite goes right in like 25 years of We Three Kings in my life. It's me. It's not any of you. It's me. We used to have a priest when I was growing up who had this thing that when he was a young man, they had three men sing We Three Kings, and they were they would each one of the men would be one of the kings, and they would sing a verse like as a solo to the congregation. And he loved to try to do it in the church, but no one could ever quite get it right, because we're all just people. We make mistakes. And I remember like one year he was like kind of yelling. It was not really nice at the two guys that were doing it. He's like, every year we screw this up, and every year you never get it right. And can we just for one time get We Three Kings right? And the two guys were like, you don't like being yelled at by your priest even when you're an adult. And so they did their best, and they did perfect. First one went up and did it perfect. Second one went up, did it perfect. Then the priest goes up, messes up all his lines, says words backwards, just in front of the whole congregation. Everyone in unison beat red, laughing hysterically. And then, but at We Three Kings, we all come together. Everyone just goes, oh, to save them, right? And we go right to the chorus. And that's what you do at We Three Kings. If there's ever any hiccups at We Three Kings, someone just yells out, oh, and we all know what to do. So it's good. That's just a life lesson. If We Three Kings, we ever get mixed up in a verse or something, just wait till the chorus and we all get back on the same page. This Sunday is Epiphany Sunday. Our gospel reading is about the kings. They weren't really kings. I love the song, but they weren't really kings. They were Magi, wise men, people who were advisors in Persia or Babylon, one of those two places, to the king. And so they were like cabinet members, to kind of use our own terms. They were part astronomers, part diplomats, part administrators. And so their job was for the king to figure out what's going on in the stars and how's that going to affect what's going on in the kingdom and how to make sense of it. There was a famous Magi in the Old Testament. His Daniel and the Lion's Den fame. He was a Magi. He was a bright young student taken to Persia, Babylon in exile, and was made a Magi, kind of one of the king's top advisors. So it's this position that was of great importance in the Eastern empires of that time. And what happens is they're watching the stars, because that's what they do. They watch the stars and they see how it's going to happen in real time. And they notice something that they put together is over Israel, that there's a king being born over Israel. And so they get up to go on this trip to see Jesus. Now, in my mind, if you ever watch like any Christmas show, or of course every Christmas pageant, like Jesus is a baby, the wise men come like right after the shepherds. We have our Christmas creche. You probably have them in your home. It's shepherds and wise men. That's a great kind of image. It brings the story together. But in reality, it took them a long time to get there. Jesus was probably like between 6 months and a year when they arrived. The journey they took was a long one. It was like walking from Harlingen to Amarillo. Not a quick trip. Not going to get there in a day. Not going to get there in a week. Some people think it took over a month for them to get on their journey. And they were important people. So they weren't traveling light. They weren't necessarily traveling alone. I don't know, if the Secretary of State goes and visits Brazil, I doubt it's just him like renting a Toyota out of the airport and driving around, right? There's like a caravan of important people that go with him. There's for security, there's other diplomats, there's things like that. There's a caravan. Well, the Magi had a caravan. I'm sure they had security. I'm sure they had a chef, somebody that would cook for them. I don't know. I would have brought a chef. Maybe they didn't, but I would have brought a chef. That would have been, somebody's got to like feed them along the way in this caravan of people. And they probably had people that took care of like laundry and all that stuff while they were going. So if you think about our image is like 3 guys and 3 camels, like walking through the desert. But probably just picture a caravan. The Bible never tells us how many people were there. It just tells us that they brought 3 gifts. So we just assume it's 3. But picture a large group moving through the desert on this long journey. And it takes time to get there. By the time they get everything set up and make the arrangements, they don't arrive until 6 months, a year, somewhere in that vicinity after Jesus is born. Jesus is at the time living in Bethlehem. I'm assuming that's where Mary and Joseph were going to live. The custom of the time was that if you got married, the husband's family was the family that you joined. And so a daughter would marry someone else's son, and that daughter would join that family. They would live near that family or work in that family business. And then if you had sons, you would have daughters that would join your family, daughter-in-laws that would join your family. It was just a custom. So we know Joseph's family's from Bethlehem. That's where they go for the census. And I'm assuming that Mary and Joseph were going to live in Bethlehem. The story tells us that when they get to find Jesus, they're in a house. I kind of like to think of it as they had a home, their starter home in Bethlehem, that was where they were going to live their life. Well, the wise men, the Magi, their first stop is the palace because they think a king's being born in Israel. Where else is it going to be born but in the king's palace? The king's having a son. Herod was surprised to hear that because he didn't have a son at that time. He had older kids. Herod was older, so his days of having young sons was kind of behind him and wasn't quite sure what they were talking about. But he asked and thought maybe they're talking about some sort of Messiah. He wanted to know more about it. Now, Herod has 2 reasons he's interested here. One is Herod's not super popular with the people. Herod's really, really popular with Rome. Rome conquered Israel. Herod's Rome's king in Israel. He makes sure people don't rebel. He makes sure taxes get paid. Rome loves him. The people hate him because he makes sure people don't rebel and he makes sure taxes get paid. So the people do not like him. But there's another thing too. Herod isn't really legitimate in the eyes of the people because he's not from David's line. He's not from David's family. He's not part of the bloodline that the people are waiting for the true king to come from. Herod's just kind of a guy who rose to power. And so Herod does not want anyone taking his spot. And he doesn't want anybody getting the people's hopes up that there might be somebody in David's line, born in David's city, that could be a rival to him. So Herod comes up with this idea, says, he tells the wise men, go find him, and then tell me exactly where he is, and I'll go pay my respect. Herod's going to kill him. But the wise men don't know that. They go and they find Mary and Jesus in the house. They bring him the gifts, and then they're warned in a dream to go back another way. Remember, this is a large caravan. They're not just going to slip through the middle of Jerusalem downtown on their way back. They can't sneak through. They're going to get noticed. So they find another road to go back. Herod's angry that he's been outsmarted and has a plan to get the children. Well, that's not this week's story. This week's story is about the Magi coming and what it means. So a couple things. One for the church, one just very personal for us. God draws who he draws to his son. We don't really have power of invitation of who God wants to bring. Now, we can invite people to know his son, but ultimately God's got an invite list that maybe we may or may not agree with, but it's his. And in the Jewish world, the idea that 3 Gentiles would be drawn to see and recognize and worship the Christ child would be a little off-putting. He's not for them. He's for us. But this story is really, really important in the New Testament to show that from the very beginning, Jesus was for us and for them. That's why St. Francis of Assisi in the 1100s, when he invented the Christmas creche that we have now, he made the first one. He wanted the shepherds and the wise men to be there together so that we would be reminded that Jesus came for Jews and Gentiles, for them and for us, for all people. So that's a helpful reminder. Now, we don't live in a time like Jesus did, where our world was divided between Jews and Gentiles. But we know a little bit about division. We know a little bit about sides. We know we live in a time where we can understand drawing lines and dividing. And it's a helpful reminder that Jesus is for them and for us. Right? He's trying to draw people to himself that we might find our healing and our health in him. So a great reminder then and now. But one more thing, a little more personal, is that everybody in the story around Christmas has a choice. Mary has a choice. Joseph has a choice. The shepherds have a choice to come. The wise men have lots of choices, I'm sure, on this 1-month road trip across the desert to turn back, to stop. They have choices. I mean, think about your traveling and when you've done kind of extensive trips. There's a lot of logistics that go into it. There's a lot of inconvenience and there's a lot of cost. They had the choice to pull the plug at any given time, right? Everybody has a choice in the story, and even Herod has a choice. And Herod's the one character we don't put in our Christmas scenes because he makes the choice for himself. He can be invited into this story if he responded a different way, but he doesn't. He doesn't. Kind of rejects the Christ child because it's a disruption to what he's got going on. And Herod's a bit of a tyrant. He's not a good guy. We might say maybe he's even evil. And I'm not saying any of us would even be close to Herod, but there might be times when God kind of initiates a disruption in our life and we are really resisting it because we like what we've got going on. We're comfortable. It's easy. I'm used to it. It's routine. And the disruption just would take us out of that. And Herod said no. Of all the people in the story that we remember, all of them said yes, but Herod said no. He wanted it his way. He didn't want to accept what God was doing. And so I think we all have a Herod's choice at various points in our life where God kind of initiates a disruption. Now, not everything that's inconvenient in our life is God's disruption, right? Right now, our ice maker broke in our refrigerator. That's not God disrupting me. That's just a refrigerator, right? You have car problems. That's a car. But there are times in our life where things are on the cusp of change that are out of our control, right? You recognize those. Many of you have lived through those. We had a great friend when we were in seminary who would tell the story of he was a doctor and then had an experience of conversion, and he went into ministry. And the thing that was his conversion experience was he and his wife had a child later in life. They had two, and the second child in utero was diagnosed with Down syndrome. And he had some choices that were presented before him, as you can imagine. But he accepted the disruption that was going to cause to his routine and his life and his family, because it was going to change it. And he would tell you it was the greatest change that ever happened in his life. As he would tell the story, God taught him how to love through that child. It was the greatest disruption he had ever experienced. But he had to accept it. And it changed his life. And put him on a course to be a doctor part-time and a priest part-time. And he was a great father and a great guy and just a great friend. Somebody who was loving. But he would say, I wasn't always that way. This child changed my heart and changed my life. It was a disruption. He said yes to, and he was the better for it. All of us are going to experience, maybe not to that degree, but you understand what I'm saying. There are going to be moments in our life where disruption is at the door. We're going to have a choice, like Herod. We could say, okay, like everyone else in the Christmas story did. Mary, Joseph, shepherds, wise men, everyone else said yes. It's going to change my life, but I'll do it. And Herod said no. too comfortable. I like having my control. So I hope this year we might be open to God's disruptions, whatever they might be. Maybe we're past the point of resolutions. Maybe we've made some and broken some already. It is January 5th. But a good one this year might be to just be open to God's disruptions in our life, wherever they might come, from things outside of our control that might put things at our door that would cause some disruptions. But usually, no one has ever said yes to God's disruptions and been the worse for it. And so I hope this year we might have our eyes open and say yes to God's disruptions like every person in the Christmas story did, except for Herod. In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.